911, what's your emergency?
Please, there's someone in my house. I'm trapped. The doors won't open.
I'm sending help right now. Can you tell me your location?
You have to help me. You're the only one who can help.
Officers are 2 minutes away. What's your address?
1847 Ashwood Drive, apartment 3B.
That's my address. That's my apartment.
Octavia.
This can't be real. Hello?
Octavia,
Who's there? What do you want?
it happened to me too, Octavia. The calls, the shadows, if you don't leave, you'll end up like me.
No, this can't be real.
Octavia Reeves stood in her kitchen at 2 in the morning, staring at the screen of her cell phone with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. The address glowing on the display was impossible. It couldn't be real, but there it was, clear as day in the emergency dispatch system she'd accessed from her laptop. The 911 call that had come through 3 hours ago during her shift had been traced to 1847 Ashwood Drive, apartment 3B. Her address, her home. The voice on that call had been screaming about someone in the house, begging for help, sobbing that they couldn't get out. But Octavia had been at work when that call came in. She'd been sitting in the dispatch center 20 minutes across town, wearing her headset, taking calls from strangers in crisis. She hadn't been home. Nobody had been home. She lived alone. She'd lived alone for the past 2 years since the divorce. The apartment had been empty. She knew it had been empty because she'd rushed home right after her shift ended, her supervisor giving her a concerned look when she'd practically run out the door. She'd checked every room, every closet, every corner. Nothing. Nobody. The windows were locked from the inside. The door had been dead-bolted exactly how she'd left it that morning. But someone had called 911 from inside her apartment while she wasn't there. Someone had used her address. Someone had screamed for help from a place that should have been empty. And now she stood in her kitchen in the dead of night, too terrified to go back to sleep, listening to the recording of that call for the 5th time. The voice was muffled, panicked, desperate. She couldn't tell if it was male or female, but right before the call cut off, right in those last 3 seconds, the person had whispered something that made her blood run cold. They'd whispered her name. If you're already feeling the dread creeping in and you need to know how this nightmare unfolds, hit that like button right now and subscribe, because what I'm about to tell you will make you question everything you think you know about reality. Trust me, this story goes places you won't see coming, and you're going to want to stick around until the very end. Octavia Reeves had never been afraid of silence until she started working nights. For the first 3 years of her career as a 911 operator, she'd worked day shifts. Those were busy, chaotic, filled with the constant ringing of calls and the overlapping voices of her coworkers coordinating with police, fire, and medical services. Day shifts felt productive, purposeful, but 2 years ago, after the divorce, she'd requested permanent nights. The pay was slightly better, and more importantly, there were fewer people around to ask how she was doing. Fewer concerned looks, fewer awkward conversations about her personal life. Night shifts were quieter, lonelier, and that had felt like exactly what she needed. Now she wasn't so sure. It was a Tuesday in late October when everything changed. Octavia had been working the graveyard shift, 11 at night until 7 in the morning, for 23 months straight. She knew the rhythm of those hours. The first part of the night brought drunk driving calls, domestic disputes, bar fights. After 2 in the morning, things usually slowed down. The city seemed to exhale. By 4, the calls were mostly insomniacs reporting suspicious noises or elderly people with medical emergencies. By 6, the morning rush started building again. Octavia had learned to predict it all. That Tuesday started like any other. She'd arrived at the dispatch center at 10:45, made herself a cup of terrible coffee from the break room, and logged into her station. The room was fluorescent bright, windowless, filled with the quiet murmur of her 3 coworkers speaking into their headsets. Octavia put on her own headset, pulled up her screen, and settled in. The first few hours were routine. A noise complaint, a possible break-in that turned out to be a cat knocking over trash cans, a minor car accident with no injuries, a woman having a panic attack, Octavia handled each call with the same calm, professional voice she'd perfected over 8 years. She asked the right questions. She dispatched the right services. She stayed on the line until help arrived. She did her job. At 1:47 in the morning, her screen lit up with a new call. Octavia clicked to answer, her voice automatically shifting into that practiced tone of controlled calm. 911. What's your emergency? For a moment, there was only breathing on the other end. Heavy, panicked breathing. Then a voice, muffled and desperate. Please, you have to help me. There's someone in my house. Octavia's fingers moved across her keyboard, pulling up the address traced to the call. Okay, I'm here to help you. Can you tell me your location? I'm trapped, the voice said, words tumbling over each other. I can't get out. The doors won't open. Please send someone. I'm sending help right now, Octavia said, keeping her voice steady while her eyes scanned the address on her screen. Something felt wrong. The address looked familiar. Can you tell me where you are in the house? Are you somewhere safe? The breathing got louder, more frantic. They won't let me leave. I've tried everything. The windows won't break. I don't understand what's happening. Who won't let you leave? Octavia asked, typing rapidly to dispatch police to the address. Is someone threatening you? I can hear them, the caller whispered. They're in the other room. Please hurry. Police are on their way, Octavia assured them. Stay on the line with me. Don't hang up. Can you tell me your name? There was a sound like crying, or maybe laughter. It was hard to tell through the distortion on the line. Then the voice spoke again, clearer this time. You have to help me. You're the only one who can help. I am helping you, Octavia said. Officers are 2 minutes away. Stay with me. The line went quiet except for that heavy breathing. Octavia glanced at the address again, and that's when her stomach dropped. 1847 Ashwood Drive, apartment 3B. She read it 3 times, certain she'd made a mistake, but the system didn't make mistakes about addresses. The number on her screen was clear. That was her address, her apartment. Hello? Octavia said, her professional calm cracking slightly. Are you still there? The breathing stopped. For 5 long seconds, the line was completely silent. Then, so quiet she almost missed it. The voice whispered, Octavia. The call disconnected. Octavia sat frozen, staring at her screen, her heart hammered against her ribs. This had to be a mistake, a technical glitch. Maybe someone had spoofed the address. That happens sometimes. Criminals trying to confuse emergency services. But how did they know her name? Dispatchers never gave their names on calls. It was policy. She was always just the operator or ma'am to callers. You okay over there? Called Dante, one of her coworkers, from 2 stations down. Octavia realized she was sitting completely still, her hands hovering over her keyboard. Yeah, she said, forcing her voice to sound normal. Yeah. I'm fine. She checked the dispatch log. 2 patrol cars had been sent to 1847 Ashwood Drive. They'd arrive in less than a minute. Octavia pulled up her personal cell phone from her bag and called her neighbor, Mrs. Chen, who lived in the apartment next to hers. The phone rang 6 times before going to voicemail. Octavia tried again, same result. She stood up, pulling off her headset. Her supervisor, a tired-looking woman named Lakshmi, glanced up from her desk. Reeves, problem? I need to take my break, Octavia said. The words came out too fast. Lakshmi frowned. You just got here 2 hours ago. Personal emergency, Octavia said. I'll be back in 20 minutes. She didn't wait for permission. She grabbed her jacket and keys and headed for the parking lot. The drive to her apartment building normally took 18 minutes. That night, she made it in 12, running 2 red lights and taking corners too fast. The patrol cars were already there when she arrived, their lights painting the front of the building in alternating red and blue. 2 officers stood in the lobby talking to Mr. Alvarez, the building manager, a man in his 60s who looked annoyed at being woken up at 2 in the morning. Octavia parked and ran toward them. Officers, she said, slightly out of breath. I'm Octavia Reeves. I live in 3B. I'm the one who dispatched you here, the taller officer, a man with gray at his temples and a nameplate that read Holloway, looked confused. You called 911 about your own apartment? No, Octavia said. Someone else called. From my apartment while I was at work. The officers exchanged a glance. The second officer, younger with sharp eyes and a nameplate reading Tours, spoke up. Ma'am, we checked the apartment. Your building manager let us in. There's nobody inside. You're sure? Octavia asked. Positive, Torres said. We cleared every room, checked the closets, under the bed, the bathroom. Nobody's there. Nothing looks disturbed. The call came from inside my apartment, Octavia insisted. I saw the address on my screen. Someone called from 3B 20 minutes ago. Holloway's expression softened slightly. Is it possible someone has your address listed incorrectly in their phone? Sometimes when people call 911, if their phone's GPS is glitchy or they've got the wrong address programmed in, it can show up wrong in the system. Octavia wanted to argue, to explain that she knew how the system worked. That address spoofing was rare and required technical knowledge most people didn't have. But both officers were looking at her with that expression she recognized. The one that said they thought she was overreacting, maybe unstable, definitely wasting their time. Can I go up and check myself? She asked quietly. It's your apartment, Holloway said with a shrug. We'll wait here until you're satisfied everything's secure. Octavia took the stairs instead of the elevator, her legs shaky. The hallway on the third floor was empty, silent except for the hum of the ice machine at the far end. Her apartment door was closed but unlocked where the officers had left it. She pushed it open slowly. The lights were off, exactly as she'd left them that morning. Octavia flipped the switch. Her small living room appeared, unchanged. The same throw blanket draped over the back of the couch. The same stack of unopened mail on the coffee table. The same 2 coffee mugs in the sink from yesterday. Everything was exactly, perfectly normal. She walked through the apartment anyway, checking every room. The bedroom with its unmade bed and pile of laundry in the corner. The bathroom with its dripping faucet she kept meaning to fix. The tiny kitchen with its outdated appliances and the calendar on the fridge, still showing September even though it was late October. Nothing was out of place. Nothing was missing. No signs anyone had been inside. Octavia checked the windows, locked. The front door had been dead-bolted. She was the only one with a key except for the building manager, and he'd just been downstairs when the call came in. She stood in the middle of her living room, feeling foolish and frightened in equal measure. The officers were right. There was nobody here. Nothing had happened. Maybe it had been a system error. Maybe someone had spoofed the address. Maybe there was a reasonable explanation. Except that voice had whispered her name. Octavia locked the door behind her and went back downstairs. The officers were already getting back into their patrol car. She thanked them, apologized for the confusion, and watched them drive away. Mr. Alvarez muttered something about false alarms and went back to his apartment. The building settled into silence. Octavia went back upstairs. She locked her door, engaged the deadbolt and the chain lock, and then pulled a chair from the kitchen and wedged it under the doorknob the way she'd seen people do in movies. It probably wouldn't actually stop anyone, but it made her feel slightly better. She didn't sleep. She sat on her couch, with all the lights on, staring at her phone, replaying the call in her mind. At 6:30, she got ready for bed, even though her shift didn't end until 7. At 7:15, she was back in her car, driving to the dispatch center. At 7:30, she walked into Lakshmi's office. I need to hear a call recording, Octavia said. Lakshmi looked up from her computer, dark circles under her eyes. From last night? From my station. 1:47 a.m. Lakshmi's fingers moved across her keyboard. You know you can pull your own recordings from your station. I know, Octavia said. I wanted to do it officially for the record. Something in her voice made Lakshmi pause. She pulled up the recording and played it. Octavia listened to her own voice, calm and professional, answering the call. She listened to the breathing on the other end. She waited for the desperate voice begging for help. It never came. On the recording, there was only silence. Heavy breathing, yes, but no words, no voice saying they were trapped, no voice begging for help, no voice whispering her name. The call was 43 seconds of breathing and then dead air. Maybe their connection was bad, Lakshmi suggested, watching Octavia's face. Sometimes the audio doesn't record properly if the caller's phone is damaged or if there's interference. I heard them, Octavia said. Her voice sounded distant to her own ears. They were talking. They told me someone was in their house. The recording doesn't show that, Lakshmi said gently. Are you feeling okay, Reeves? You look exhausted. I'm fine, Octavia said automatically. When's the last time you took a day off? Octavia couldn't remember. Months probably, maybe longer. I'm fine, she repeated. Lakshmi gave her a look that said she didn't believe that for a second. Take tonight off. Get some real sleep. Come back tomorrow. I don't need. That's not a suggestion, Lakshmi said, her voice firm but not unkind. You've got plenty of PTO saved up. Use it. Rest. Come back when you're feeling better. Octavia wanted to argue. She wanted to make Lakshmi listen to the recording again, to hear what she had heard. But she knew how she looked. Sleep-deprived, wild-eyed. Talking about hearing voices that weren't on the recording. If she pushed too hard, Lakshmi wouldn't just send her home for one night. She'd send her to occupational health for a psychiatric evaluation. Okay, Octavia said quietly. I'll take tonight off. She went home and tried to sleep. She managed 2 hours before waking up, convinced she'd heard someone moving in the living room. She got up and checked. Nothing. She went back to bed. An hour later, she woke up again, this time certain she'd heard whispering. She checked again. Still nothing. By early afternoon, she gave up on sleep entirely and made herself eat something even though she wasn't hungry. She tried to watch television but couldn't focus. Her mind kept replaying that call. The voice had been real. She knew it had been real. At 4 p.m., she drove to an electronics store and bought 2 security cameras and a video doorbell. She spent the next 3 hours installing them, mounting one camera facing her front door from inside the apartment and one facing the living room. The doorbell went outside in the hallway. She synced everything to her phone and tested each camera 3 times to make sure they were working. If someone came into her apartment, she would know. She would have proof. That night, she lay in bed with her phone next to her pillow, the camera feeds open on the screen. She watched the empty rooms of her apartment. Nothing moved except the shadows from passing car headlights outside her window. At some point, exhaustion won over fear and she fell asleep. She woke up at 3 a.m. to her phone buzzing. A notification from the security system. Motion detected. Octavia sat up so fast her head spun. She fumbled for her phone, her heart racing. The camera feed showed her living room. At first, she didn't see anything. The room was dark, lit only by the ambient light from the street. Then she saw it, a shadow, moving across the wall. Octavia stared at the screen, her breath caught in her throat. The shadow moved slowly, deliberately, like someone walking through the room. But the camera showed no one. The living room was empty. She watched for 5 minutes. The shadow moved again, this time in a different direction. It stretched and contracted like something alive, but there was nothing there to cast it. Octavia got out of bed, grabbed the baseball bat she dug out of her hall closet earlier, and crept toward the living room. She moved slowly, quietly, the bat raised. When she reached the doorway, she flipped on the light. The room was empty, completely, utterly empty. No intruder, no movement, no shadow. She checked the camera feed on her phone again. In the bright light, the living room looked normal, harmless, just furniture and empty space. Octavia stood there for a long time, the bat heavy in her hands. She was starting to think Lakshmi was right. Maybe she did need to see someone. Maybe she was cracking under the stress of the job, the divorce, the isolation. Maybe the voice on the call had been her imagination. Maybe the shadow was just a trick of the light. She was about to go back to bed when her phone rang. Not a notification, an actual call. At 3:15 in the morning, she looked at the screen. Unknown number. Her hands shook as she answered. Hello? Breathing, heavy and labored. The same breathing from the 911 call. Who is this? Octavia demanded. The breathing continued for 10 long seconds. Then the voice came through, clearer than before. You have to get out of that apartment, Octavia, before it's too late. Who are you? Octavia's voice cracked. How do you know my name? It happened to me too, the voice said. The calls, the shadows, I tried to ignore it. I thought I was going crazy. But it's real. It's all real. And if you don't leave, you'll end up like me. Like you? Octavia whispered. What happened to you? The line went dead. Octavia immediately tried to call the number back. It rang once, and then a mechanical voice informed her the number was not in service. She checked her call log. The number was there. A string of digits that looked wrong, somehow, too many numbers, arranged in a pattern that didn't match any area code she recognized. She grabbed her laptop and pulled up the 911 system remotely, something she wasn't technically supposed to do from home, but everyone did anyway. She checked the log from earlier that night. At 3:14 a.m., another call had come in. Same address, 1847 Ashwood Drive, apartment 3B. Same pattern as before. A 43-second call, nothing but breathing on the recording. But this time, Octavia hadn't been at work. She'd been here, in the apartment, alone. Someone was calling 911 from inside her apartment while she was standing in it. That wasn't possible. It couldn't be possible. Octavia walked through every room again, checking windows, checking locks, looking for any phone or device that could have placed a call. Nothing. Her own phone was in her hand. She had a laptop, a tablet, neither of which had phone capabilities. She didn't have a landline. There was no way a call could have originated from this apartment. But it had. She stood in the middle of her living room as the first light of dawn started creeping through her windows, and she realized with cold, creeping certainty that something was very wrong with this place. Something had been wrong from the moment she moved in 2 years ago, and she'd been too busy, too tired, too focused on putting her life back together to notice the voice. On the phone had said, "It happened to me too," which meant someone else had lived here. Someone else had received these calls. Someone else had experienced whatever this was, and that person was trying to warn her. Octavia grabbed her laptop and opened a search engine. She typed in her address, followed by death, an incident, and 911. She scrolled through pages of irrelevant results. Then, on the 4th page, she found a brief news article from 3 years ago. Local woman found dead in apartment. The article was short, just 3 paragraphs. It mentioned the address but not the apartment number. The woman's name was Corinne Vidal, age 34. The cause of death was listed as undetermined pending investigation. There was no follow-up article, no explanation. Octavia searched Corinne's name. A few social media profiles popped up, but they'd all been deactivated or memorialized. Then she found an obituary. Corinne Vidal, beloved daughter and sister, died unexpectedly. Services to be held at Riverside Memorial. In lieu of flowers, donations can be made to the First Responders Mental Health Foundation. First responders. Octavia's hands went numb. She searched Corinne Vidal 911 operator and found what she was looking for. A 5-year-old article from the city employee newsletter highlighting outstanding workers. There was Corinne smiling in her headset, sitting at a dispatch desk. The caption read, "Corinne Vidal, 911 operator, recognized for 5 years of dedicated service." Corinne had been a 911 operator. She'd worked at the same dispatch center, and she died in this apartment. Octavia's apartment. The sun was fully up now, light streaming through the windows, but Octavia felt colder than she'd ever been in her life. She looked at the cameras she'd installed, the locks on her door, the bat still clutched in her hand. None of it would help. None of it would stop whatever was happening, because the calls weren't coming from an intruder. They weren't a technical glitch or a spoofed number. They were coming from something else, something that had been here before her, something that had driven Corinne Vidal to an undetermined death, and now it was happening again. Octavia's phone buzzed. Another notification from the security system. She looked at the camera feed with shaking hands. The living room was empty in the morning light, but on the wall, clear as day despite the sunlight, a shadow moved. A shadow shaped like a person. Walking toward the camera, getting closer, Octavia couldn't breathe. She stared at the screen as the shadow approached, even though the room was empty, even though there was nothing there to cast it. The shadow reached the camera. On her screen, Everything went dark. Then her phone rang again. Unknown number. Same pattern of too many digits. She answered without thinking. The breathing was there immediately. Faster now, more desperate. Please, the voice said, and this time Octavia recognized something in it. Please, you have to listen. I tried to warn the next person who lived here. I've tried to warn everyone, but nobody listens. Nobody believes, and then it's too late. Corinne? Octavia whispered. Is this Corinne Vidal? The breathing hitched. You found my name. Good, that's good. Maybe you're smarter than I was. Maybe you'll get out in time. Get out in time from what? Octavia asked. What's happening? What is this? I don't know, Corinne's voice said, crackling like an old recording. I worked so many calls, so many voices. People screaming, people dying, people begging for help. I thought I could handle it. I thought I was strong. But the voices don't leave. They stay. They echo. And in that apartment, they're louder. Stronger. They can reach through. Reach through from where? Octavia's voice was barely audible. From the calls, from the void, from all the pain we hear every night and can never fix. It collects there in that place. It builds, and eventually, it builds enough to become something, to do something. The line crackled with static. I have to go, Corinne said. It's getting harder to reach you. But Octavia, get out. Get out before the calls stop being voices and start being real. The call ended. Octavia stood alone in her living room as normal morning sounds filtered in from outside. A car door slamming, someone walking their dog, the world continuing on like everything was fine. But everything wasn't fine, because Octavia understood now. The apartment wasn't haunted by a ghost. It was haunted by something far worse. It was haunted by the job. By all the suffering she heard every night, all the emergencies she couldn't prevent, all the deaths she could only witness through a phone line. In this place, somehow, those voices had found a way to call back. If you're sitting there with chills running down your spine, wondering how this gets even darker, hit that like button and comment, keep going. Because what Octavia discovers next will make you question everything you think you know about reality. And trust me, you haven't seen anything yet. Octavia didn't go back to work for 3 days. She called in sick, which wasn't entirely a lie. She felt sick, bone-deep exhausted. Her hand shook when she held her coffee cup. She couldn't focus on anything for more than a few minutes before her mind started spiraling back to those calls, to Corinne's voice, to the shadow that moved across her wall. On the second day, she packed a bag and checked into a cheap motel 6 miles from her apartment. She told herself it was just to get some sleep, just to clear her head. But really, she couldn't stand being in that apartment anymore. Every shadow looked wrong. Every sound made her jump, and her phone kept ringing, unknown numbers. Too many digits. She stopped answering. She let them go to voicemail. But the voicemails were just breathing. That same heavy, desperate breathing. On the 3rd day, sitting in the motel room with bad coffee and worse sleep behind her, Octavia made a decision. She couldn't run from this. She couldn't pretend it wasn't happening. If Corinne had tried to warn people and failed, if this pattern had been repeating in that apartment for who knew how long, then someone needed to figure out what was actually happening and how to stop it. She opened her laptop and started researching. She looked up every article she could find about Corinne Vidal. There wasn't much. The obituary, the employee newsletter, one mention in a report about 911 operator retention rates. Corinne had worked for the city for 6 years before her death. She'd been considered reliable, professional, good at her job. There were no disciplinary actions in her file, no red flags. Octavia dug deeper. She found the police report about Corinne's death through a public records request she filed online, paying $15 for a PDF that arrived in her email an hour later. She read it 3 times, looking for details the news article had left out. Corinne had been found in her apartment on a Tuesday morning by the building manager after missing 2 consecutive shifts without calling in. The door had been locked from inside, windows secure, no signs of forced entry, no signs of struggle. Corinne was found in her living room, sitting on the couch. The report said she appeared to have died of cardiac arrest, though the autopsy was inconclusive. There were no drugs in her system, no alcohol, no pre-existing heart conditions. A healthy 34-year-old woman had simply stopped living, sitting on her couch in a locked apartment. The only unusual detail in the report was mentioned almost as an afterthought. When police entered the apartment, every electronic device Corinne owned was turned on: her television, her laptop, her phone, her tablet, the radio in the kitchen. All of them were on, though most were showing static or dead channels. The officer who wrote the report noted it as odd but not necessarily relevant to cause of death. Octavia stared at that detail for a long time. Every device turned on, all showing static. She thought about the shadow on her camera, the way it had moved closer until the screen went dark. She thought about the unknown numbers calling her phone, numbers with too many digits that didn't match any pattern she recognized. What if the calls weren't coming through normal phone lines? What if they were coming through something else? Something that could reach through any electronic signal, any device capable of receiving transmissions? It sounded insane. But then again, getting 911 calls from her own apartment while she was standing in it was also insane, and that was definitely happening. Octavia started a new search. She looked for other deaths in her apartment building, other incidents connected to Unit 3B. The building was 40 years old, built in the early 1980s. It had changed ownership 3 times. Finding records was difficult, but she kept digging. 2 days of research later, she found something, another death. This one 9 years ago, before Corinne moved in. A man named Felix Brennan, age 41, same apartment, same circumstances, found dead in his living room with no obvious cause, no autopsy findings, no explanation. The report mentioned he worked for the city utilities department, but it didn't specify what he did. Octavia called the utilities department pretending to be a journalist writing a piece about long-term city employees. After being transferred 4 times, she finally reached someone in HR who remembered Felix. "Oh yes," the woman said, "Felix Brennan. Tragic loss. He worked in our emergency call routing division. Very dedicated employee." "Emergency call routing," Octavia repeated slowly. "You mean like 911? Related, yes. He helped maintain the infrastructure that routes emergency calls to the appropriate dispatch centers. Technical work, mostly. He wasn't a dispatcher himself, but he worked closely with that system." Octavia thanked her and hung up. Her hands were shaking again. 2 people dead in that apartment, both connected to emergency services, both with no clear cause of death, both found with electronics behaving strangely. She needed to talk to someone who would believe her, or at least someone who wouldn't immediately suggest she needed psychiatric help. She thought about her coworkers at the dispatch center. Dante was friendly but wouldn't take this seriously. Lakshmi would send her to occupational health. But there was one person who might listen: Detective Silas Brennan. She'd met him a few times when calls she'd dispatched turned into major investigations, and the detectives came by to thank the dispatch team. He'd always seemed sharp, thorough, someone who looked deeper than surface explanations, and his last name was Brennan, same as Felix. It took her an hour to track down his direct line. When he answered, his voice was gruff but not unfriendly. "Brennan, detective, this is Octavia Reeves. I'm a 911 operator. We've met a few times at the dispatch center. I remember. What can I do for you, Miss Reeves?" She took a breath. "This is going to sound strange, but I need to ask you about Felix Brennan, the man who died 9 years ago in apartment 3B at 1847 Ashwood Drive." There was a long pause. "That's my uncle. How do you know about Felix?" "I live in that apartment," Octavia said, "and I think something is very wrong with it." She told him everything. The calls from her own address, the voice claiming to be Corinne Vidal, the shadow on the camera, the research she'd done. She spoke quickly, trying to get it all out before he could interrupt or hang up. When she finished, she waited for him to tell her she was wasting his time. Instead, he said quietly, "Can you meet me at the apartment in an hour? You believe me?" "I believe something strange happened to my uncle," Silas said, "and I've never been satisfied with the explanation I got. If there's a connection to what you're experiencing, I want to know about it. An hour later, Octavia stood outside her apartment building next to Detective Silas Brennan. He was in his late 40s, tall and solid, with lines around his eyes that suggested he'd seen too much. He carried a leather bag that clinked when he set it down. "Before we go in," he said, "I want you to know that I'm here as Felix's nephew, not as a detective on official business. What I'm about to tell you doesn't leave this conversation unless we find something that constitutes an actual crime." "Understood," Octavia nodded. "Felix called me 2 days before he died," Silas said. "He sounded wrong, paranoid. He said he was hearing voices through his work computer, through his phone, through his car radio. He said they were the calls he'd routed over the years, thousands of emergency calls, and they were all trying to reach him at once. I thought he was having a breakdown. I told him to see a doctor. He said he'd tried, but every time he left the apartment, the voices got quieter. So he kept going back because at least in the apartment, he could hear what they were trying to tell him." "What were they trying to tell him?" Octavia asked. "That's the thing. I asked him that, and he said they weren't telling him anything. They were just screaming, begging, dying, over and over. Every emergency he'd ever heard in 15 years of work, all playing at once." Silas looked at the building. "I went to check on him the next day. He wouldn't answer the door. The day after that, the building manager found him. They went upstairs together. Octavia unlocked her apartment, and they stepped inside. In the afternoon light, it looked completely normal, almost aggressively normal. Silas set down his bag and pulled out some kind of electronic device. "F-meter," he explained at Octavia's questioning look. "Measures electromagnetic fields. If there's unusual electrical activity, this'll pick it up." He moved through the apartment slowly, watching the meter. It stayed quiet in the bedroom, the bathroom, the kitchen. But when he entered the living room, it started beeping. The beeping got faster as he approached the wall where Octavia had seen shadow. "That's interesting," Silas muttered. He pulled out his phone and took several pictures of the wall. "There's a significant electromagnetic field here. No obvious source. No wiring in this wall that would cause it." "What does that mean?" Octavia asked. "I don't know yet." He turned to look at her. "You said you installed cameras. Can I see the footage from the night you saw the shadow?" Octavia pulled it up on her phone. They watched together as the shadow moved across the empty room, approaching the camera, the screen going dark. Silas watched it 3 times without speaking. "Send that to me," he said finally. "I want to have it analyzed." "Analyzed for what? I'm not sure. But I know someone at the university who studies unusual phenomena. Not a ghost hunter," he added quickly at her expression. "A physicist. If this is some kind of electromagnetic event, he might be able to explain it." Octavia sent him the video. "Do you think this killed Corinne and your uncle? Some kind of electromagnetic something?" "I think," Silas said slowly, "that electromagnetic fields can affect human perception. They can cause hallucinations, feelings of dread, the sensation of being watched. There are documented cases of people experiencing hauntings that turned out to be nothing more than faulty wiring creating fields that affected their brains." "But," Octavia prompted, hearing the unspoken word, "but that doesn't explain the 911 calls coming from this address when nobody's here. That doesn't explain voices on the phone that know things they shouldn't know. And it doesn't explain how my uncle and Corinne Vidal both died of apparent cardiac arrest with no medical explanation." He paused. "Unless the stress of the hallucinations was severe enough to cause heart failure. Extreme fear can do that." "They were scared to death," Octavia said quietly. "Literally, maybe." Silas looked around the apartment. "How long is your lease?" "Month to month. I can leave any time with 30 days' notice." "Then my advice is to give notice. Stay somewhere else. Don't come back here. And let it happen to the next person who moves in." Octavia shook her head. "That's what Corinne tried to do. Warn people. It didn't work. Someone needs to figure out what's actually happening here and stop it." Silas studied her for a moment. "You're serious about this?" "I'm a 911 operator," Octavia said. "I've spent 8 years hearing people in the worst moments of their lives. I've heard things I can't unhear. I've taken calls I still dream about. And I've wondered more than once how people do this job for decades without it breaking something inside them. She gestured around the apartment. Maybe this is the answer. Maybe it does break something. Maybe it leaves a mark. And maybe in this specific place, that mark becomes something real. That's not science, Silas said. I know. But can you explain what's happening any other way? He couldn't, and they both knew it. He promised to contact her after his physicist friend looked at the video, and he left. Octavia stood alone in her apartment, looking at the wall where the EMF meter had gone crazy. That night, back at the motel, she dreamed about Corinne. In the dream, Corinne was sitting at a dispatch desk, wearing a headset, taking call after call, but each call was the same. A voice screaming for help. The same voice, Corinne's voice. She was calling for help, but she was also answering the calls. Trapped in a loop of emergency and response that never ended, Octavia woke up gasping. Her phone was ringing. Unknown number. She answered without thinking. Hello? It's getting worse. Corinne's voice crackling with static. I can feel you getting closer. You're asking questions. That makes it angry. What makes it angry? Octavia demanded. What is it? The calls. All the calls they collect. They build. They become something, and it needs someone to hear it. Someone who knows how to listen to emergencies. Someone trained to stay on the line. Why that apartment? Why there specifically? I don't know. Something about the building. Something about the structure, the wiring, the signals. It all focuses there, like a lens. Felix felt it first. He worked with the infrastructure. He understood signals, and when he died there, it got stronger. And then I moved in, and now me, Octavia said. And now you. But Octavia? You're fighting it. You left. That's good. Felix never left. I tried to leave, but I kept coming back. I thought I could understand it. I thought I could help the voices. I was wrong. What happened to you, Corinne? How did you die? The static got louder. I let them in. I listened to every call, all at once. Thousands of them. Every emergency, every scream, every death. I thought if I listened, if I really heard them, they'd stop calling. But they just got louder. Louder and louder until my heart couldn't take it anymore. I'm sorry, Octavia whispered. Don't be sorry. Be smart. Destroy it. Destroy the apartment. Burn it down if you have to. Don't let it take anyone else. The call ended. Octavia sat in her motel bed staring at her phone. Burn it down. She couldn't do that. But maybe there was another way. The next morning, she called Silas. I need your help with something. Something probably illegal. I'm a cop, Miss Reeves. I know. That's why I'm asking you to help me as Felix's nephew, not as Detective Brennan. There was a pause. What do you need? I need to get into the building's electrical and communication infrastructure. I think whatever is happening is connected to the wiring, the phone lines, the cable. I think it's using the signals somehow. If we cut the apartment off from those systems, you could stop it, Silas finished. That's breaking and entering, destruction of property. Yes, another pause. When? They met that night at the apartment building. Silas had brought tools. They waited until after midnight when the building was quiet. The basement was locked, but Silas had ways around that. They found the electrical and communications panel, a mess of wires and junction boxes that served the entire building. Which unit is yours? Silas asked, studying the panel. 3B. He traced the wires with his flashlight. Here, this feeds power to your unit, and these are the phone and cable lines. What if we disconnect them? All of them. You'll have no power, no phone, no internet. I don't care. Will it work? If your theory is right, if this is somehow using electrical signals to manifest, then yes, maybe, it's worth a try. They spent the next hour carefully disconnecting every line feeding into apartment 3B. When they were done, Silas checked his work twice. That's it. The apartment is completely isolated from the grid. No power coming in, no signals, nothing. They went upstairs. Octavia unlocked the apartment and pushed the door open. It was completely dark inside. She pulled out a flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating her furniture, her belongings, everything exactly as she'd left it. But the air felt different, lighter somehow. Like pressure she hadn't realized she was feeling had suddenly lifted. They walked through the apartment together, Flashlights sweeping across walls and floors. Nothing moved, no shadows, no sounds. Octavia pulled out her phone, no signal. The cameras she'd installed were offline, no power to run them. "I think it worked," she said quietly. "Don't celebrate yet," Silas warned. "Wait a few days, see if anything changes." She waited. 5 days in the motel, checking her phone constantly. No more calls from unknown numbers. No more breathing. No more warnings from Corinne. On the 6th day, she worked up the courage to go back to the apartment during daylight hours. It was still powerless, dark, silent, but it felt normal. Just an empty apartment, no dread, no wrongness, just space. She called an electrician, a different one than the building normally used, and had him come to restore power. She told him there'd been a wiring issue, made up some excuse about voltage problems. He didn't ask questions. He reconnected everything, flipped the breakers, and power flooded back into the apartment. Octavia held her breath, waiting for something to happen. The lights came on. The refrigerator hummed to life. Her phone picked up signal again. Everything normal. She stayed there that night, her first night back in the apartment in over a week. She barely slept, waiting for her phone to ring, waiting for shadows to move. Nothing happened. The next night was the same, and the next. 2 weeks passed. Octavia went back to work. Lakshmi seemed relieved to see her looking more rested, more stable. Octavia took calls. She dispatched help. She did her job, and nothing strange happened. She started to believe it was over. Whatever had been in that apartment, whatever had killed Felix and Corinne, was gone. Cutting it off from the electrical grid had starved it, or broken it, or scattered it. She didn't understand the mechanism, but she didn't need to. She just needed it to be over. 3 weeks after they'd disconnected the power, her phone rang during her shift. She answered automatically. 911. "What's your emergency?" Breathing, heavy and desperate. Octavia's blood went cold. "Hello, what's your emergency?" The address popped up on her screen. 1847 Ashwood Drive, apartment 3B. No. It was supposed to be over. "Please," a voice whispered. Not Corinne this time. Someone new, someone she didn't recognize. "Please help me. I'm trapped. I can't get out." "Who is this?" Octavia demanded. "It won't let me leave. I've been here so long, please. You have to help me." "Where are you calling from?" "Your apartment." "I'm in your apartment. I've been here the whole time." Octavia checked the dispatch log. The call was real. It was in the system. Her coworkers could see it. This wasn't in her head. "I'm sending help," she said, following protocol even though her hands were shaking. "Don't," the voice said urgently. "Don't send anyone. It's not safe. The more people who come here, the stronger it gets. Don't you understand? You fed it." "What?" "When you cut the power, when you reconnected it, you made it angry, you made it hungry, and now it's not just calls anymore. Now it's taking people." "Taking people where?" The voice started crying. "Into the static, into the space between signals. That's where we all are, Felix, Corinne, me, all of us, stuck in the emergency that never ends." The call disconnected. Octavia sat frozen at her desk. She looked at the timestamp. The call had come in at 3:14 a.m., the same time Corinne always called. She pulled off her headset and ran. If you're on the edge of your seat dying to know what Octavia finds when she gets to that apartment and how this nightmare finally ends, smash that like button and drop "reveal it" in the comments, because the truth has been hiding in plain sight the whole time, and what happens next will blow your mind. Octavia broke every traffic law getting to her apartment. She didn't care. Fear had pushed past the point where caution mattered. She'd thought cutting the power would end this. She'd thought she'd won, but she'd only made it worse. The voice on the call had said she'd fed it, made it stronger. And now it wasn't just manifesting through electronics. Now it was taking people into the static, into the space between signals. She didn't know what that meant, but every instinct screamed that she was running out of time. When she reached the building, it was dark except for a few lights in scattered windows. Normal people sleeping. Normal people with normal problems. Octavia ran up the stairs, her breath coming in gasps, and threw open her apartment door. The lights were on even though she'd turned them off when she left for work. Every light in the apartment, just like they'd found Corinne. just like they'd found Felix. No, Octavia whispered. No, not like them. I'm not like them. But she was, wasn't she? Another emergency services worker. Another person trained to listen to suffering. Another person who'd chosen a job that meant hearing the worst of humanity every single shift. She walked through the apartment slowly. Everything looked normal until she reached the living room. The television was on, showing static. Her laptop was open on the coffee table, the screen filled with white noise. Her tablet on the kitchen counter displayed the same. Even her phone, still clutched in her hand, was buzzing constantly with notification after notification. Unknown numbers, all calling at once. Octavia looked at the wall where Silas had detected the electromagnetic field. The paint was bubbling, actually bubbling, like something was heating it from behind. As she watched, the paint cracked and peeled away, falling in strips to the floor. Underneath, the wall was covered in writing. Thousands of words scratched into the drywall beneath the paint. Phone numbers, addresses, fragments of conversations. Help me. Please hurry. I can't breathe. They're breaking down the door. My baby isn't moving. I don't want to die. Send someone. Please, please, please. The words overlapped each other, cramming every inch of exposed wall, written in different handwritings, different pressures, different tools. Some looked carved deep into the drywall. Some looked written in something dark that might have been blood. This was what was behind the walls. This was what the electromagnetic field was protecting, or containing, or feeding. Every emergency call that had ever been routed through this building's infrastructure, every cry for help, every desperate plea, all of them had left a mark, and somehow, in this specific place, those marks had accumulated into something aware, something that could reach back. Octavia's phone stopped buzzing. Every device in the apartment went silent at the same moment. The television cut from static to black. The laptop screen went dark. Even the lights flickered and steadied, burning dimmer than before. In the sudden quiet, she heard breathing. Not from a phone, not from a speaker. From the wall itself, the wall with the writing, it was breathing. Octavia. Her name came from everywhere and nowhere, not a voice so much as a vibration in the air. You came back. What are you? She asked. Surprised, her voice worked at all. We are the unfinished, the interrupted. The emergencies that ended before help arrived. We are every call you could not save. You're not real, Octavia said, but the words sounded hollow even to her own ears. We are as real as you made us. Every time you listened, every time you stayed on the line, every time you heard someone's last words. You gave us form, you gave us voice. All of you did, Felix, Corinne. Every dispatcher who lived in this place, you taught us how to call for help. And now we cannot stop. The writing on the wall was spreading. Octavia watched in horror as it crept across the ceiling, the floor, covering every surface. Her furniture, her belongings, everything was being consumed by those desperate words. Why? She demanded. Why this apartment? Why us? The building sits on old ground, telegraph lines, telephone cables, radio towers. This place has always been a junction point for voices traveling through wires. And when the emergency system was built, when 911 was created, this building became a convergence point. Every call routed through infrastructure that feeds through this place. Most of the signals pass through without leaving a mark. But some calls are too strong, too desperate, too final. Those calls leave echoes. And in this specific unit, those echoes found a way to build, to become. The breathing from the wall was getting faster, more agitated. And when someone who knows how to hear emergencies lives here, someone trained to listen, to stay on the line, to never hang up, we can finally speak. We can finally be heard. So you're trying to call for help, Octavia said, understanding dawning. You're still trying to be saved. We are beyond saving. We are the moments after help was too late. We are the silence after the line goes dead. We are the calls you play back and wonder if you could have done something differently. We are your failure given voice. The words hit like a physical blow. Octavia had spent years building walls around those feelings. Every call where someone died before EMS arrived. Every domestic violence situation that ended in violence despite her best efforts to keep the caller calm. Every child who stopped breathing while she walked a panicked parent through CPR. She'd learned to categorize them as part of the job. She'd learned to file them away and move on to the next call. But they hadn't moved on. They'd stayed. They'd accumulated. And apparently, they'd found a place to live. What happened to Felix and Corinne? Octavia asked. Did you kill them? We did not kill. We called. We called and called and called. And they listened. They stayed on the line. They heard every emergency at once, every voice, every scream, every final word. The human heart is not meant to hold that much suffering. It breaks. It stops. We did not mean to stop them. We only wanted to be heard. And the voice that's been calling me, the warnings? Corinne. She understood too late. Now she is part of us. Part of the static. But some small piece of her remembers being alive, remembers wanting to save people. She tries to warn. She tries to help. But she is so small now, so scattered. Soon she will forget even that. Octavia felt tears on her face. This has to stop. You can't keep doing this to people. We cannot stop. We are emergency. We are the call that never ends. We will always cry out. We will always beg for help. It is all we are. Then I'll make sure nobody else lives here, Octavia said fiercely. I'll get the apartment condemned. I'll tell the building owner what's happening. There are others, the voice interrupted. Other places. Other convergence points. Other buildings where the infrastructure focuses. Other apartments where the walls breathe with desperate words. We are here. We are in Dallas, in Los Angeles, in Chicago. Everywhere the emergency network reaches, we can form. Everywhere dispatchers live and work, we can speak. You cannot stop us by leaving. You can only stop us by listening. I don't understand. The wall rippled. The writing rearranged itself, forming new words directly in front of Octavia's eyes. Listen to us. Truly listen. Hear our calls. Let us finish what was interrupted. Let us tell you what we never got to say. Maybe then we can rest. Octavia stared at the wall. You want me to take your calls, one at a time. Let each voice speak. Let each emergency be heard in full, the way it would have been if help had arrived in time. We have been screaming all at once for so long, we have forgotten how to speak one at a time. But you know how to triage. You know how to prioritize. Help us remember how to be individual again. Help us remember how to end. It was insane. It was impossible. But Octavia thought about Corinne, scattered across the static, unable to rest. She thought about Felix, who'd heard voices through every device and tried to understand. She thought about whoever might move into this apartment next if she simply walked away. If I do this, she said slowly, if I listen to every call, let every voice speak, you'll stop? You'll let people go? We will try. We cannot promise. We do not fully understand what we are. But if we can be heard, truly heard, one at a time instead of all at once, perhaps we can remember how to be silent. Octavia pulled out her phone, her real phone, not the devices possessed by the entity. She called Silas. He answered on the second ring, sounding groggy. It was almost 4 a.m. It's Octavia, she said. I need you to come to the apartment and bring recording equipment, a lot of it. What's happening? I'm going to take some calls, and I need someone to document it. Someone who will remember what happened here and make sure it's not forgotten. Silas arrived 30 minutes later with a bag full of audio recorders, cameras, and a laptop. He stopped dead in the doorway when he saw the writing covering every surface. Jesus Christ, he whispered. It's okay, Octavia said, though it very much was not okay. Set up the equipment. I need you to record everything. He did as she asked, his hand shaking slightly as he positioned cameras and audio recorders around the room. When he was done, he looked at her. What are you going to do? My job, Octavia said simply. I'm going to answer calls. She sat on her couch, the same couch where Corinne had been found, and she addressed the wall. I'm ready, one at a time. Let me hear you. The wall shimmered. The writing shifted, and Octavia's phone rang. She answered, 911, what's your emergency? My husband, a woman's voice said, clearer than any of the previous calls. He's not breathing. I don't know what to do. Please help me. I'm here, Octavia said gently. Tell me what happened. The woman described finding her husband collapsed in the kitchen. Octavia walked her through checking for a pulse. starting CPR, keeping the airway clear. She stayed on the line, offering calm instructions and reassurance, even though she knew this call had ended years ago, even though she knew help hadn't arrived in time. When the woman's voice finally faded, she whispered, "Thank you for staying with me." The call ended. On the wall, a section of writing dimmed and faded, not disappeared, but quieter, settled. The phone rang again. 911, what's your emergency? There's someone trying to break into my apartment, a man said, voice tight with fear. I can hear them at the door. Octavia talked to him. She told him to find a safe room, to lock the door, to stay quiet. She asked for his address even though she knew it didn't matter anymore. She stayed on the line with him through his fear, his panic, his desperate hope that police would arrive. When his voice faded, he said, "I'm scared." "I know," Octavia said. "I'm still here. You're not alone." "Thank you." The call ended. More writing faded on the wall. Call after call after call, Octavia answered everyone. She gave her full attention to each voice, each emergency, each person who'd called for help and hadn't survived long enough to receive it. She listened to medical emergencies, home invasions, fires, accidents, heart attacks, domestic violence, overdoses. She heard the last words of people who died waiting for help that came too late. Some calls were from years ago, the voices using technology that didn't exist anymore. Some were from months ago. Each one played out exactly as it had happened, exactly as some dispatcher somewhere had heard it before the line went dead. Octavia didn't try to rewrite the endings. She didn't pretend help was coming when she knew it wasn't. She just listened. She stayed on the line. She gave each voice her full attention and let them say everything they'd needed to say. Hours passed. The sun came up. Silas sat silently, recording everything, his face showing the strain of hearing so much suffering, but he didn't leave. He stayed as witness. Finally, after what felt like days but was only 14 hours, Octavia answered a call and heard silence. She waited. No voice came. "Hello?" she said. "Is anyone there?" Octavia. Corinne's voice, stronger than before, more solid. "It's me." "Corinne," Octavia breathed. "Are you okay?" "I'm tired," Corinne said. "So tired, but I can feel myself again, the others too. You gave them space, you gave them time. You let them finish their emergencies. Some of them are starting to fade, really fade. Not just into static, into silence, into rest. How many more?" Octavia asked. Her voice was hoarse from talking for 14 hours straight. "I don't know. Hundreds, maybe thousands, years of calls." "But Octavia, you can't do them all yourself. You'll end up like Felix. Like me, the human heart can't hold this much. Then what do? You document it. You tell people. You make sure other dispatchers know what this job can become if we don't find ways to process it, to let it go. You make sure the buildings where this happens are known, marked, avoided. You make sure nobody else has to die listening to echoes." Corinne's voice was fading. "And you forgive yourself for the calls you couldn't save, for the people who died waiting. It's not your fault. It was never your fault. We all did our best. Corinne, I have to go now. It's getting quiet here. I think I can rest soon." "Thank you, Octavia, for hearing us, for staying on the line." The call ended. Octavia sat in silence, tears streaming down her face. The wall in front of her was mostly blank now. Most of the writing had faded. What remained was lighter, less frantic, more like old graffiti than desperate pleas. Silas cleared his throat. "It's been 14 hours. You need to stop. You need rest." "There are more calls," Octavia protested weakly. "And they'll still be there tomorrow, and the day after. This isn't a job you can finish in one shift." He stood and walked over to her. "You did something remarkable here. You gave them what they needed. But you have to take care of yourself too. That's the lesson, isn't it? You can't save everyone. You can't hear all the suffering. You have to know when to clock out." Octavia looked at the wall, at the faded writing, at the evidence of years of accumulated pain. "What do we do about this?" "We document it. We share the recordings with people who study this kind of thing. We make sure the building owner knows. We make sure future tenants are warned. And we make sure dispatchers everywhere know the signs of this kind of trauma accumulation. We turn this into something that helps the living instead of haunting them." Octavia nodded slowly. She was exhausted beyond anything she'd ever felt. But for the first time in weeks, she wasn't afraid. The apartment felt quieter, lighter. The breathing had stopped. The pressure was gone. She spent the next week working with Silas to compile everything they'd recorded. The videos, the audio, the photographs of the wall. They created a detailed report and sent copies to occupational health departments, dispatcher training programs, and researchers who studied PTSD in emergency services workers. The building owner was horrified when they showed him the evidence. He had the apartment professionally cleaned, blessed by 3 different religious leaders just to be safe, and then converted it into storage space. Nobody would live there again. Octavia gave her notice at the dispatch center, not because she was running away, but because she'd realized Corinne was right. 8 years was enough. She'd given what she could to the job. It was time to find a different way to help people, one that didn't require her to absorb so much pain. She moved to a different apartment across town. On her first night there, her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. Octavia. Corinne's voice, barely a whisper. Most of us are gone now, really gone, at rest. But I wanted to say thank you and goodbye. Are you at peace? Octavia asked. Getting there. It's quieter now, softer. I can almost remember what it felt like to be alive without carrying everyone's emergencies. You gave that back to me. You reminded me that each call deserves its own space, its own time, that we don't have to carry them all at once. I learned that from you, Octavia said, from seeing what happens when we try, then we helped each other. Corinne's voice was fading. Take care of yourself, Octavia. Let the calls end when they're supposed to end. Don't hold on to them the way I did. I won't, Octavia promised. Rest now, Corinne. You've earned it. The call ended. Octavia's phone showed no record of it, no unknown number, no call log, but she knew it had been real. 3 months later, Octavia started a new job as a counselor for first responders, using her experience to help other dispatchers, EMTs, police officers, and firefighters process the trauma of their work. She taught them about compassion fatigue, about secondary trauma, about the importance of setting boundaries and knowing when to clock out emotionally as well as physically. She told them about Corinne and Felix, though she framed it as a cautionary tale rather than a literal haunting. She told them about the danger of letting calls accumulate, of trying to carry too much, of believing you have to save everyone. She taught them that the most important lesson of emergency services was knowing that you could do everything right and still have calls that ended in tragedy. And that those tragedies weren't weights they had to carry forever. Some of them understood immediately. Others took longer, but she planted seeds. She gave them permission to process their experiences instead of burying them. She showed them that acknowledging the emotional cost of the work wasn't weakness. It was survival. Late one night, 6 months after leaving the dispatch center, Octavia got a call from Silas. I thought you should know, he said. We identified some of the voices from the recordings, matched them to actual 911 calls from the past decade. We've been able to give closure to some families who never knew exactly what happened to their loved ones in those final moments. Your recordings, they're helping people. That's good, Octavia said quietly. They deserve to be heard. They did, and they were because of you. Silas paused. The physicist I showed the electromagnetic readings to has a theory. He thinks certain building materials, combined with specific infrastructure layouts and enough emotional resonance, can create something like a recording medium. Not conscious, not malicious, just storage, the same way magnetic tape stores sound. And in rare cases, that storage can interact with electromagnetic fields in ways that seem like communication. So it wasn't a haunting, Octavia said. Maybe it was. Maybe it wasn't. Maybe it doesn't matter what we call it. The point is, it was real. It affected real people, and now we know how to prevent it, or at least how to recognize the signs. After they hung up, Octavia sat in her new apartment, safe and quiet and free of desperate voices. She thought about Corinne, hopefully at rest now. She thought about Felix and all the other dispatchers over the years who'd carried too much and broken under the weight. She thought about the lesson she'd learned in that apartment, with the breathing walls and the desperate writing. That being a 911 operator meant you'd hear the worst of humanity. That you'd be the last voice some people heard. That you'd try to save people and sometimes fail. And that the only way to survive the job was to acknowledge the impact it had on you, to process the calls instead of storing them, and to know when it was time to disconnect, not from caring, not from helping, but from the belief that you had to sacrifice yourself to save others. That was the truth behind the calls. That was the real horror. Not supernatural entities or electromagnetic hauntings, just the simple, terrible fact that human beings weren't designed to absorb unlimited suffering, that empathy had a cost, that listening had a price, and that ignoring that truth turned people into echo chambers for other people's pain until there was nothing left of themselves. Octavia's phone buzzed. A text from one of the dispatchers she'd been counseling. Just wanted to say thank you. I started seeing the therapist you recommended. It's helping. I don't feel like I'm drowning anymore. She smiled and typed back a response. Proud of you. Remember, you can't save everyone, but you can save yourself. She sent the text and set down her phone. Outside her window, the city hummed with its usual nighttime sounds, sirens in the distance, car horns, the occasional shout. Somewhere out there, dispatchers were answering calls, staying on the line, helping people through their worst moments. And somewhere, hopefully, Corinne Vidal was finally silent, finally at rest, finally free from the emergency that never ended. Octavia closed her eyes and breathed, in and out, present in her own life instead of lost in other people's crises. It had taken her 8 years and a haunted apartment to learn that lesson, but she'd learned it. Some calls you can save, some calls you can't, and the trick to survival is knowing the difference, honoring both, and then letting them go. That was the truth, that was the lesson, and it was one she'd carry with her for the rest of her life, not as a burden, but as hard-won wisdom that she could use to help others find their way out of the static and back into the light. The emergency was over, the line was clear, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, Octavia Reeves was finally truly at peace. Thank you for staying until the end of this chronicle. You didn't have to, but you did, and that means everything. Every story we tell exists because of listeners like you, who are drawn to the dark, who respect the truth behind the terror, and who believe these stories deserve to be heard. If this chronicle moved you, unsettled you, or made you think, share it. Someone out there needs to hear this story. Until next time, stay curious, stay vigilant, and remember, where darkness is documented, truth survives. This has been the Dark Chronicles. Subscribe and become part of the Chronicle.